Hello, everybody. Wow, I'm looking at the attendees and I'm seeing a lot of familiar names. So that's really awesome. Let me pause my camera. It's really great to be here. You can read the about women, how women are different webinar series on your screen right now. I'm thrilled to be here today. Some of the objectives are to develop culturally relevant understanding of women from different cultures with SUD and to develop provider awareness of one impacts someone's decisions, biases, and worldview in their willingness to receive information, to adapt and alter attitudes when working with women, and to identify specific, effective, cross-cultural and strength-based approaches to work with women in treatment and recovery, and ultimately to build cultural competency. So it's really, as I said, it's a thrill to be here today. I have to say that I do a lot of webinars, and this one for me has been, I did three of them last week, different webinars, and this one has been tough. This is because it's a little personal, and you'll see as I get a little further into my story. Let me introduce myself to those of you, the many on the webinar that I don't know. My name is Neil Campbell. I'm the executive director of the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse, and we are an agency that does four things. We do education, we do advocacy, we do training, and we do peer recovery support services. And I've been at the council about 10 years, and I'll explain about how my journey is, how I got here in a little bit. I'm also a woman in long-term recovery. And what that means for me is that it's been a little over 28 years since I've had my last drink or illegal drug. And I know you're all clapping hysterically because of that, because it's awesome. And I speak out about my recovery every chance I get because I want everybody to have the opportunities that I've had to get and to stay well. And I come at all of this from a recovery perspective. So if you're looking for discussion of diagnosis, if you're looking for discussion of evidence-based practices and substance use disorder treatment, you may want to come to another webinar because that's not this one. I'm none of those things, and I'm not an expert in anything other than my recovery, and I think I'm becoming an expert on how to empower others to talk about their recovery as well. So let's get started. I had another slide here to introduce myself, and I just want to say that I am on there's a couple of different boards that I do serve on that I'm proud to serve on. One is the National Latino and Hispanic ATTC. I just got an appointment to that organization, and I'm thrilled to be part of that. It's been a learning journey so far. And I'm also on the NIATEX Foundation board, and I am a long proponent of NIATEX and their process improvement strategies. So it's also my honor to be on that board. So let me just start out. So this is I love this picture that's on here. It's the picture is by an artist, a photographer named David Sanford, and it's a picture of Lake Erie, and it's called Lake Erie Monster. And I was born in Ohio and moved up to Lake Erie when I was just a child. And to me, that this picture symbolizes a lot of strength, but yet a lot of anger. Because that's, if you don't know anything about the Great Lakes, it's a very much a shallow, it's the shallowest of the Great Lakes, and it's often very tumultuous and very angry. And I think that my life has been a journey of learning how to bottle that anger, learning what to do with that anger, learning how to channel that anger into something positive. I was raised since we are supposed to be talking about culture, I was raised in a middle-class white family, two parents, four kids. I have two brothers and a sister, so I have three siblings. And I think the most important thing about my youth and about growing up was that I started drinking at a very, very young age. The first time I remember having an experience where I found that alcohol was very transforming was when I was 10 on New Year's Eve. That's young. And alcohol was all over my family. We had come from an ethnic background, German and Italian. It was acceptable in the neighborhood where I lived. And so alcohol was always available since I can remember, since before I was 10. But I remember the first time that I started drinking was age 10. And I really didn't spend a sober New Year's Eve from 10 until I got well when I was 30. So when I think about why, when I look at the journey so far, I think about how was mental illness and addiction discussed in our home? And I often ask other people that question, and it wasn't discussed in my family. You didn't talk about those things then. So stigma and discrimination was real, and it was, you know, something that you just didn't discuss. And I think that that happens in a lot of cultures and a lot of families, but it was from an early age, you knew not to talk about this. So when I discovered alcohol and how alcohol made me feel, it was very transformative for me. And I think it became a huge part of my personality early on. I also I have had a long life because I'm old. If I'm born in 1960, y'all do the math. I'm an old person, older person. Um, but one of the talents that I had and one of the strengths that I had as a child was the strength of athletics. And so I had a basketball scholarship offer, a bunch of them, to go to college and play basketball. And I did that my first year anyway. So but I was still drinking alcoholically by the time I was in high school. And I mean by that, drinking just about every day that I could. Um, Again, got caught a bunch in high school, but never had any consequences for it. Now I'm going to stop right there because some of you are going, you what? But I can't even count the number of times that I have been stopped for a DUI. I don't remember. I can't. Some of them I literally don't remember, but others I couldn't count them all. Now I know that's a function of my upbringing, where I lived. I know it's the color of my skin. I know it's my gender. And that's something that I think we could have a whole discussion on that, the racial disparities, the socioeconomic disparities on when people get picked up. Now, back then, they didn't have a juvenile hall or juvenile detention. They just took you home and, I got screamed at a lot, but I never once got arrested. And I think to me, that's a real marker. And I know that that's a privilege that I had. And I know when I see other people who do get caught and the consequences they get for their actions, I recognize that I was truly lucky. Like I said, I went to college on a basketball scholarship, played for a year, and then I transferred to a bigger school in Ohio, and that's Bowling Green State University. And I was drinking a lot. There's years of my undergrad that I honestly don't remember. Um, because of the amount of alcohol and the amount of drugs that we were doing in college. And some of that people say, well, that's just typical, that's what you do. But it really, for me, it was a way of life. I'll just be honest. And then when I graduated, I moved to Key West. So this little map on the right, for those of you who can see this, this is my journey. I went from Ohio, moved to Key West, went typical Key West vacation, went to Key West on vacation and ended up getting a job in the jail because I had a degree in criminal justice corrections and they needed people to work in the jail. So I got a job working in the Monroe County Jail in 1982. And I stayed there for a year and did not like it. If you remember what was happening in the South Florida in the early 80s, those of you who are old enough to remember, it was a very unhealthy situation, especially for someone who had a substance use issue like I did. And so I got out of there fairly quickly. Took that journey up to Los Angeles, and then to San Francisco, and ran out of money in Seattle. Again, it was me and my partner at the time. We were just driving around in a big old van, you know, living kind of off the land. We had saved some money, but ended up stopping in Seattle, stayed there for a year, tried to get on with the police department, but that didn't work out. And I ended up going back all the way across the country to Ohio. Now, if you look at that, you say that person, that all happened in the span of just a few years. I was running away. I don't have relationships in any of these places where I lived. I think that's a real, for me, someone who's in active addiction, that tends to be a symptom. You don't develop relationships that are long lasting often, and I didn't. So I went back to Ohio, stayed there another couple of years. Actually, I worked in the Ohio Reformatory for Women for almost 4 years, and then moved back down to Tallahassee, Florida, where I stayed for 15 years. So I just want to make note of, I don't know how typical it is for women to do this, but I know it's typical for people who are in an active addiction to get real restless and to just, I used to say I would set off a neutron bomb and then just leave. So I had experiences all over the country. I'm really glad I got to travel, but I wouldn't say it was that I was being the healthiest person in the world. Um, but I kept going. And when I moved to back to Florida, I ended up staying there and working in adult and juvenile corrections until I left, and in active addiction. But then it gets better, people. I finally found recovery in 1990, and I that was another journey. I didn't hang around anybody who was sober. I didn't know what sobriety was. I just knew that I was sick. I had gone to a physician in 1989, and because I was having bad stomach problems, and I was again getting stopped for DUI fairly often. And my doctor said to me at the time, my primary care physician, so I still had insurance. Let's think about that too. Luckily I had insurance. And he said to me, if you don't quit drinking, you're not going to have a functioning liver in 5 years. So that planted a seed in my head. And but I didn't stop. And it wasn't until 1990 when a series of things happened in my life that caused me to crash pretty hard. Again, I had nobody in my life that was there to say, hey, what's going on with you? I was just who I was, and it was accepted. So my father passed away, my relationship broke up, and I was homeless. I had nowhere to stay. So I was driving down the road on Lafayette Street in Tallahassee. I remember not knowing where I was staying that night. I didn't know where my stuff was. I pulled over to the side of the road and I looked up and I said, God, I don't want to live like this anymore. And it was a day later when a friend of mine that I happened to know and work with, saw me, cared about me, and took me to a 12-step meeting. And that was the last time I had a drink. I will say this too, that person was the man I ended up marrying. This will sound familiar to some because I think we don't talk enough about how I didn't have any women that I knew in sobriety. So I ended up getting involved with with the man who helped me get sober. I will be eternally grateful to him for that. But we got married, and I know it's going to be a huge surprise to everybody. It didn't work out. I think it didn't work out because I was not a fully formed person at that point in terms of self-identification. I didn't know who I was. I knew that I couldn't drink anymore. The traditions and the um, things I was learning about 12-step and about my alcoholism made a lot of sense to me. So I had a lot to learn, but sometimes you don't have a lot of sense, especially in early recovery. And my early recovery was very, very fragile. So I didn't have a whole lot of relationships. I ended up helping raise my husband at the time, his two children, and they are perfect. I see that on the screen. It says helped raise two perfect children. You will see the product of them as well later on in my life. And my heart started to grow when I became a stepmom, a step parent, and it hasn't stopped since. So that was really transformational for me as well. And I have talked to a lot of women. I was sitting around the table not a few years ago, and it was with a group of women. There were like 7 of us, and I believe we were a diverse group, but there were 7 of us, and all of us have gotten sober within a year of turning 30, either 29 to 31. And I thought that was really interesting. I would love for someone to talk about or study, what kind of life changes or what kind of brain changes are going on then, because I think something happened when I turned 30 that life got real serious, and my father passed away. So I think that's for women, especially. I think when you start getting of a certain age, life, there's just some things that become pretty serious, and that's how it was for me. I finished my master's degree at Florida State University, and I moved to Georgia. My relationship broke up in Florida, and so I did that geographic cure again, and I moved to Georgia. Fell in love with my beautiful partner of almost 22 years, Lori Campbell. We are still together today. That picture on the right is bliss. It's relaxation. It's puppy dogs and mountains, and that's been a huge part of my recovery, is being outdoors, is being around animals, is being with Lori, and someone who is so supportive of me. So um, I ended up working in juvenile justice until 2005 here in Georgia. It's where we are now and where I am now. And then I also became the first director of the Office of Addictive Diseases in 2005. That for me, so I had a career, and I know that I have to overlay sort of my professional life with my personal life as well, because it, for me, as someone who I felt I hit pretty much the pinnacle of my career. It's like, wow, I'm the state director of substance abuse. I'm still going to 12-step meetings. I'm still going to therapy. I'm still doing, I'm still a person in recovery, but I'm also in charge of all state and federal dollars that are coming through the state system at the time. So that kind of gave me some incentive to do some more internal work. I ended up not liking that job very much, hitting the pinnacle, but feeling like it wasn't for me. Mainly because I looked around and there wasn't anybody like me at the table. And when I say like me, I mean in recovery. And again, remember, I'm a recovery advocate, but what we heard a lot of were people saying things like, "You people don't want to get better. You people are expensive. You people don't know what it's like." And I kept thinking they're talking about me. So it wasn't a good fit. I stayed there about 3 years, and it felt, I have on here that it felt too much like using, and it really did, in that I woke up every morning and I tried to make changes and I couldn't make any changes in a system that was bigger than me. So for the first time in my life, I've always, even through my alcoholism, even through the dysfunction, I kept a job. I was really lucky, and I recognize that as well. But this was the first time where I quit my job and didn't have anything waiting for me, because I thought I got to get out of here. So I took a risk and quit. Luckily, I had support. I had a lot of support around me for that. I had my 12-step groups. I was into cycling at the time. I had a good group of people who kept me busy, and that was awesome. So I ended up coming to the Georgia Council on Substance Abuse in 2008, which is over 10 years ago now, and became an advocate. And one of the most important things I learned about being an advocate is that people will take pictures of you with your mouth open a lot. So that's why I have those pictures. I have my arm up, I'm usually screaming, and I've got my mouth open. But it's been the passion of my career. I love doing what I do. But I have to say, I went back in, I recognized, and for many of us, and for me, my recovery was so much about being humble, about recognizing that it's not about me, that it's about something bigger than me. I love Stephanie Covington's definition of addiction when she says it's the chronic neglect of self in favor of something or someone else. And I didn't want to neglect myself, because I knew it was risky for me to return. I didn't want to return to use. And so I went back into therapy to talk out how I could be in recovery, and be an advocate, and not lose that, not let my ego get involved. I'll just say it that way. Just to still be humble, to try to be a servant, to be a worker among workers, as it tells us in the 10th step, but also to be loud about it, because I think it's our duty to talk about our recovery, and to name it, and to say, this is what recovery looks like. And so I wanted to be that beacon, but not want to make it about me, if that makes sense. So I always feel a tension there, because my recovery is not about me. And I had another slide I stuck in here, but we couldn't get it uploaded, which was all of the people that have helped me, all of the women I named and showed who have helped me, because I did not do this by myself. And I have to say that I met a woman named Sherry Jenkins Tucker, who is currently, she was at the time, and she still is, the director of the Georgia Mental Health Consumer Network. And it was Sherry who gently showed me the power of lived recovery experience, and the power of listening to people, and the power of self-directed care and people recognizing people's strengths. And so Sherry and I are still close, and I wish she were on here because I would love her. She should be teaching this. She's someone who has, again, she was a huge beacon. And one of the things she did for me was to say, when I was still state director, she came to me and was telling me about a modified 12-step program called Double Trouble. Some of you may know it and be familiar with it. And she had some funding and she just wanted me to educate me about it. And I said, I'm pretty much a purist. I believe in the traditional 12-step. And she's like, will you do me a favor? And I said, sure. She said, go to a meeting. So I did. I went to a Double Trouble in Recovery meeting, and I gave her more funding than she asked for at the time because it is so amazing. It's a place for those of you who are familiar with it and have been to facilitated Double Trouble meetings. It's a place where people can go and talk about how they stay well with a mental illness and a substance use issue, and get some support around taking medication, get support around their symptomology that we have in common. So yes, of course. So that's the kind of person that Sherry is. She's like, go experience this and then talk to me about it. And I did. So I've got her that she showed me the power of lived experience. And then at the council, as we got bigger and bigger, and I pulled up another thing that I had added was an org chart from us 10 years ago where there were 6 of us. And now there are 40 of us working here. I have 40 people in recovery that either work full or part-time or on a contracted basis. So we have grown so much, and there are so many people, Joyce Jordan, Karen Daniel, Bev Ragland, all of you who have helped me sort of as my contemporaries understand what it means to be in recovery, to have a profession, and to create a recovery culture. And the other thing that I've learned coming from the perspective that I did was that you have to listen to people. And I feel like no one really listened to me. And one of my staff, I was talking about how I was having trouble with this webinar and, with some of the content. And they said, well, you have to have a hero. Who's the hero in the story and who's the villain? And I really do think that the villain is the social norms around addiction and around use. I think that we don't have a healthy view of what that means in this country. But I also think the hero is anger, because this anger has helped me be a good advocate. And I also think it's made me take a real look back again, let my ego go and say, I need to listen to more people and listen to communities. And I've come to the belief that people support what they help to create. And if we want to have sustainable change in our system, that people have to be part of the solution. So I want to talk a little bit for the next few minutes just about how we do the work here that is very, very, very much informed by my personal experience in recovery. And I love this quote. I'm reading again Gloria Steinem's new book about being on the road, and she talks about how she came to be and visited India. And this Gandhian wisdom is that if you want people to listen to you, you must listen to them. Because I don't know about y'all, I didn't listen to anybody when I was younger coming up, but no one listened to me. And if you hope to change the way people live, you have to know how they live. And if you want people to see you, you have to sit down with them eye to eye. And I just love that as an organizing principle that we use a lot here at the council. And it's about these relationships. So all these pictures are from real events that we have had in the state where we are listening to communities about what supports them in recovery. And yes, we get a lot of weird looks like, really? You're asking us about this question? But yeah, we are. We're asking them, because if you don't ask someone how they get support around their recovery, you're not going to figure it out. You're not going to know until you ask. So that, again, some of the brilliance that we do alongside the Mental Health Consumer Network is to listen to communities and to listen to people and help them recognize how to create something in their own world. So these are 3 magic questions that we ask, and they are magic. And I will talk about, if you have any questions about how they are magic or what we've created out of them, I can answer that, because everything we do in this organization, and again, remember, going from six people in 2009 and 10 to 40 now, this is how we do it. And we always lift up first what's working here. What are the strengths here? What's working? Um, Not just to support recovery, but to support wellness, to support each other. And the second question is, what could be better? Let's talk about our, what our vision is and where we want to go. And if we want to create something, what is it that could be better? And then the third thing is about hope. How do you keep going? And I will give all credit to Dr. Deetra Hawkins for teaching us this way. It's very much an appreciative approach. And I've got, at the end of this, I've got a slide with with the resources that have informed some of this work, which is appreciative inquiry out of Case Western Reserve. And it really is about, how do you make sustainable change possible? How do you get to know someone's history, whether it's an individual or a community? How do you listen to that and help them create a vision for going forward? And I do wish I missed that in my life. I missed that when I left home at 17 and never looked back. I never looked back at my history and had to do that way later on. So I think it's really important to do that as much in real time as you possibly can. So if you want sustainable change, this is how we do it. This is how we believe you can do that work. So some of the things that we've done, again, to support recovery and to live our recovery values, is that we celebrate it. We celebrate recovery. I will go anywhere. You saw me with my mouth wide open and talk about my recovery. I don't talk about what 12-step meeting I've gone to. I don't talk about who I've seen there, but I do talk about my recovery and the benefits of that recovery in my life, because people need a definition of and a model of what recovery looks like. And this is it. So we build local awareness and support for us going forward in a recovery focused system. And we encourage the development of local collaborations around recovery. If all you focus on in a community are the problems, what do you get more of? You get more problems. If you focus on the solutions and things that are working, what do you get? You get ways to find more solutions to these issues. And so we talk about, how do we get people in recovery in leadership positions so we can talk about what's working and we can figure out what's working from this perspective. And I hope that makes sense. Our key messages in all of this, and we've been doing this now, we're in our 7th year in partnership with our Department of Behavioral Health. We've gone around and done listening sessions all over, listened to literally thousands of people, from Moultrie to Jessup, Georgia, to Swainsboro, to Ludowici. Am I saying that right? Probably not, but up to Lafayette, all over Georgia, we've been listening to people. And our key messages are that, first of all, recovery is real. We're the evidence that people do get better. And that we also recognize that people are motivated and informed by stories. The fact that I've got a few of you still on the webinar here, you've heard my story. Hopefully you're learning something from it, but you can get motivated from it. And I firmly believe that people want to be heard and not fixed. I had a lot of people in my early recovery want to fix me, and I didn't need to be fixed. I just needed an outlet and needed to be heard. And that there are no experts in this, that even the treatment professionals, the professional helpers that I go to or that we go to, they're not the experts in my life. They have special knowledge and they can help walk with me down a path, but I'm the expert in my life and in my recovery. And that we have to be inclusive, and sustainable change means that we have to work with strengths, but we have to constantly be invitational. And one of the things we'll talk about is that it really is more than being invitational. It's being intentionally available. And I'll just tell a quick story. We have a program in Northwest Georgia, and I see a couple of our recovery coaches are on this webinar. Or in Northeast Georgia, I'm sorry, and it's called Northeast Georgia Community Connections. And we have recovery coaches working in 3 emergency rooms and in 2 neonatal intensive care units. And so we have 12, we're funded for 12 coaches up there to do this work. And there's a huge Latino population in Northeast Georgia, and we have had a hard time getting the Latino population to either apply to be a peer supporter or to to get engaged with us in some of our other recovery events. And we kept saying, well, we're inviting them. But then we realized, people they don't trust us, right? So we got to go out there and meet them. And so we hired a young woman who is, she's bilingual and she's helping us break into we're going to churches, we're going to meetings, we're going out in the community because we recognize that, people just don't trust automatically and they shouldn't because you got to make it safe. So it's more than being invitational, it's being assertive and it's doing assertive outreach to different communities if you want to bring people along. That's been something that we've learned a lot. So I wanted to talk about some of the lessons I've learned professionally and personally. And you may not be surprised, but they're exactly the same. So professionally, when we're working either with our peers or working in a community, it starts somewhere. Just do something. Start telling your story. Start having an all recovery meeting. Start nurturing strong voices in every aspect and make sure that people in recovery, and when I say recovery, I'm talking about with a mental illness or a substance use disorder, make sure that their voices are at the table. Our voices are at the table because the conversation's different. The other thing is to stick with it, that it doesn't, we didn't get this place with stigma and discrimination and the way people believe about those of us in recovery overnight. It's going to take a while. And that we have to learn and we have to grow with each other. And that collaboration can be difficult. It's not always the easiest thing. Collaboration can be superficial or it can be really, really deep depending on your relationship. So I think that's, you got to just stick with it. And that trust takes time. And that we can't fix each other. And I can't fix a community. Each community is different. Each community has its own road. Each community has, it's just unique to itself. And that we have to keep going back. I've worked enough, I'm old enough to have gone in and put a program in and say, hey, here's a policy manual, here's an implementation guide, here's a toolkit, go for it, call me when you need me. It doesn't work like that. That we have a whole unit in our office that's about recovery community development, that we're going in and helping communities understand how they can listen to each other, how we can, and we take on some tough issues. We had a symposium in a community where the people who used medication to support their recovery were not welcome. And the providers who did, the opioid treatment providers and the Suboxone providers, the clinic-based providers, were not welcome. And we had to say they are. There's just a lot of different ways people get better. And how do we start to understand and hear stories from each other and have that success of coming together for the better of everybody to create more opportunities? So we have to keep going back. You have to be inclusive and we have to listen. And you may not, and so this picture on the bottom is us. It's one of my colleagues, Steve Gaynor, and I at Walker State Prison. So two of my favorite things together is corrections and recovery. And so we get invited back there, which I hope we do again soon. I think we're going to go back in May up to Walker State Prison in Walker County near Tennessee. There's some real recovery happening there and it's amazing. So that's me in my happy place, believe it or not. Yes, I do recognize it's because I get to leave, but it doesn't, I guess what I wanted to point out was that you can have recovery in the harshest of places, that it's about hope. And what have I learned personally? The exact same thing, that for me, it was starting somewhere. I didn't know as I said, I got into early recovery, didn't know anything about it. My family still doesn't support my recovery, the family of birth. They still don't understand what went on in my life or what goes on in my life. But I had to start somewhere and start doing something. And when I did, my life just kept getting better. So the pictures that you see there are, my two perfect children had three perfect grandchildren. Maybe August is going to be a police officer. I don't know. I don't know. Who knows? If he is, he's going to be a very, very compassionate one and very cute. And these other two are amazing, Calais and Julian. These are my heart. This is why I do what I do. So when they grow up and if they get into trouble and if they have an issue, they can understand that they can get better, that recovery is possible, that they're going to have people around them that ask them, how's it going? How are you, what's going on for you? I think that's really important. And all of the things, again, that were true for me professionally are true to me personally. I got to stick with it. I stick with my recovery. I stick with my family recovery. I have to learn and keep growing. That collaboration can be difficult, and being out front in this world of advocacy can be difficult. We get shots taken at us sometimes too, but we have to keep going with it, and that we have to. I don't demand anybody trust me. I know I have to earn that trust. I know that I've had to earn the trust of family members and loved ones back. That's just part of it. And I know I can't fix anybody. I can't fix these perfect young men that we're raising, but I know I can listen to them and help them thrive in their lives. And that I'm gonna do that as much as I can. So I'm gonna look out, I'm gonna get off of that page. And the future is bright. So these are some of the young women, and when I say young, they're younger than me, and that I have interacted with a lot over the last 10 years, and they are my heroes. And that I hope they don't mind their pictures. They're all outspoken advocates, but I didn't have this 15 years ago, 10 years ago when I got into this movement. There weren't a lot of, as my friend Riley in Athens says, there's not a lot of taillights to follow. I want to be the taillights for these girls, for these women, for these young women to say, you don't have to go down the road. Let me pave that road for you as much as I can. Let me take my anger and my frustration with the system to try to make things better for you. And I truly believe that this generation, that this group is going to make things so much better. They are, one of them is in law school. One of them, is they're getting their master's degrees. They're doing things that are unbelievable, and that makes me happy. And they're doing it in recovery, and they're not ashamed of their recovery, and they know that because of their recovery, they're stronger for that. So and if you're not on this, if you're, I'm sorry, I just didn't have your picture handy. Um, but this is our future. So I wanted to leave you at least with a little bit of hope that, hopefully we are discussing it, and that there are people that look like these young women who are out there and doing the work. That it's very diverse. It's, you know, they're outspoken, and they're really smart and freaking smart. It's scary smart. So I know in the next few years, as I take a back seat, we're going to be in safe hands with a lot of these people who are doing it. So I just want to say thank you to I learn from you guys every day, and I just appreciate that. So, and listening to your stories makes me stronger. So thank you for that. And I wanted to also, I've got a couple more minutes just to talk about what has influenced my thinking around some of this stuff lately. And first of it's Dr. Ernest Holmes wrote a book back in the 20s and 30s called Science of Mind, and I have a spiritual teacher who is it talks about religious science. He's a former preacher, pastor for religious science, and Science of Mind has helped me a lot. And that's where I go. That's what I use to meditate every morning. That's my spiritual awakening, was around that stuff. And then the other thing that we give away here at the council, we buy them in bulk, is the thin book of appreciative inquiry. It's not magic, but it is magic. If you want to know how to change things from a perspective of honoring the past and honoring someone's road, use appreciative inquiry. I'm very grateful to have learned that's the system and the sort of model and the thinking that goes into that. Gloria Steinem is one of my heroes. Her latest book I just finished, and I go back to it a lot. She's amazing, and mainly because of the way she organizes on the grassroots level. I think that's something that I've always admired, and I think if we're going to do any changes, we have to grow from the bottom, but actually also push down from the top, and I think she does that better than anyone. And then What's Right with You by Dr. Barry Duncan is a foundational work around, he wrote The Heroic Client, and it's around strength-based approaches to the work, and self-directed approaches to changing something in your life. And we use that in our peer training, and I love it. And also, again, Stephanie Covington, A Woman's Way Through the 12 Steps. She is, if you read anything about her and what the work that she did in corrections early on, when I first got into recovery, this book helped me a lot. So those are kind of some of the things lately that I've been reading and thinking about. So I just want to say thank you. I want Don Tyus to notice I am 1 minute off. um, that I really thank you for this opportunity. Please follow us on Twitter. We're on Facebook at the council. We need your voice. We need, I think hopefully a little bit of my story was helpful to show that it's okay to speak out. I think you can be successful and speak out about recovery and some of the things that we've been through. I don't think our work is done. I think we need to be into marginalized communities even more. We need to be listening to women. And we try to do this whether you're a former sex worker, whether you're a trans woman, whether you are, a woman who hasn't had a voice in the past. Those are the neighborhoods we need to be going into and lifting up. And I'll say this because I try to drop a grenade every place I go. We always are trying to lift up the young Black male voice in our organization, and it's unfortunate that the place we have to go to find that voice too many times are jails and prisons. So hopefully, I know Georgia and I think the country is moving more toward um, criminal justice reform, but we're not there yet, and we need to get there. So if you want to know what's making me angry now, it's that I shouldn't have to look for um, the voices of young Black men and women by going to prison. So we're hoping to do some changing around that too. So I'm going to just say thank you and be quiet and turn it back over to my hosts, our hosts.
Well, Neil, thank you very much. And again, if there are any questions, we'd love to take those questions at this time. Again, we'd like to say thank you for participating in this webinar today, Neil. And there's a lot of support for you out there in the chat box. Before we go to our Q&A, just wanted to let everyone know that next week we have another webinar with our Women Are Different series, and we will feature the Hispanic Latino woman. And so, again, we are taking questions. We do have a couple of questions that came in a little earlier, and I'll pose those now for Neil. One of the questions Neil asked, what is the hard, why is it harder for women to hold on to trauma longer?
This, I think the trauma informed movement, again, I'm not a clinician, but I certainly have sat with people and heard their trauma and understand, I understand that people, women included, often, go through the healing of they will go through the healing of their trauma at their own pace and at their own speed. And I think, I don't know that they hold on to it longer. I think we don't make it okay for men to talk about it sometimes, but for women, what I know and through my experience is that trauma, whether it's emotional, sexual, or physical trauma, plus family history of addiction, right? Equals substance use disorder. So I think some of the trauma informed ways that are being promoted now, we do a trauma informed peer support. We have some of our coaches are teaching that around our state because I think that's really important. So I'm not sure that I know the why of it. I just know that it can be addressed in a way that hopefully is around self-direction and around strength-based, because not all of us go down that road of healing the same way. There's just a lot of different ways we get better and that we deal with our trauma.
Okay, well, thank you. What are the special concerns of this group in SUD, substance use disorder treatment? What are some of the
Yeah,
special
so are we talking
concerns
Caucasian
for
women?
Caucasian
I
women?
don't know. That's why this is so funny. I didn't go to traditional treatment, rehab. That wasn't my pathway. My pathway was a 12-step um, recovery groups plus individual therapy. And so I didn't know about rehab. So I don't know. And I'm not sure if it would have benefited me personally, my way again. And I know a lot of women, a lot of in my situation being some older white women go through to 12 step. And I think, and individual therapy too. So that wasn't, I think a special concern always with any woman in treatment is going to be children. What do you do with your children? Can you take your children there? Um, you know, we could talk another hour truly about the payment system, the delivery system, the health disparities, how we cannot get folks into treatment, that only 1 out of 10 of us, regardless of color, gets the treatment that we need. There are cultural considerations, of course. Recovery exists in a cultural context. There are certain meetings that I go to that I'm comfortable in because of who I am, whether it's, you know, a gay, straight, black, white. There are all different kinds of meetings that we go to, and I live in my community, and that supports my recovery. So of course, it has a cultural context that way as well. Um, so I don't, other than special concerns, I think it's the same. I think what's really, really important to, and the message I would give to any clinician on the phone, on the webinar is, how do you make it okay for someone to bring their whole self into the room when you're talking with them? Because I couldn't get better until I got really honest about who I was, where I wanted to go, who I wanted to be. And I had to be able to bring my whole self into that situation. And sometimes I think we make people jump through hoops. I think we put conditions on, well, you can come to therapy, but you can't talk about that. Or we don't talk about that in the group, or we don't serve those kind of people. I think we have to get real honest and say, what can we do to open the door as wide as we can? And as professional helpers, how do we get okay with ourselves to allow that person to connect with us in an honest way?
Okay, well, thank you. Another question's come in, and what are the most frequent used drugs today with white females, and why?
Alcohol is number one, I would say, and I am basing all of this on the some of our experience in the emergency rooms, and on our, we have a peer support warm line. We have a recovery coach warm line. In fact, I'd be happy, I'll put the number in the text box, so if anybody wants to talk to a recovery coach, operators are standing by right now. So I think alcohol by far is the most used and abused drug, and we see it. I know that opiates are getting a lot of attention, but you know alcohol killed alcohol related illness killed 88,000 people last year in this country. Opiate overdose, it was 72,000. So it's too many for both, but alcohol is, I think, the bane of our existence. It's socially acceptable still. It's what young people can get access to pretty quickly. And I think that that's something we don't talk about enough is, you know, because what we know is that if you can keep someone from drinking alcohol until their 21st birthday, they're 4 times less likely to have a substance use disorder. So I think alcohol is always going to be there because it's just so available. And I will put that number
Okay.
so in the text box right now. So this is our peer support warm line.
So if there are any other questions, someone typed in, I'm concerned about stigma. Women are expected to complete treatment and get little or no support upon returning home to continue the recovery activities that work for them in treatment. I hope you can speak more about this.
Yeah, stigma, I mean, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of embarrassment, there's a lot of fear around going to get help. One of our programs is that we offer recovery coaching to women in who have babies in a neonatal intensive care unit or in labor delivery or on a mother and baby unit. And what our coaches will tell you, and there's a couple of them on this webinar right now, is that when these women go home, they're often not supported. They have to go back to families, whether it's the father of the baby or their significant other who is still using. And that's a problem. So what we try to do is make connections with them while they're in with us, and can help get them to places that are convenient, that work for them, that have maybe worked in the past. I think shame and stigma and discrimination keep a lot of people from getting help. I would totally, and I think that's why we speak out, right? So if you're having a baby and you meet someone who has been in your spot, who has been a mom who has used and she's overcome that and her babies are healthy, isn't that great? So I don't want to sound like the answer to everything is peer support, but we have been using that in a hospital setting, and it seems to be working really well. So I think coming home, I think, that staying connected with a recovery community, after treatment, after drug court, after jail, that's really, really important. I think that people like, I know there's a lot of women on this, a lot of people on this webinar right now that are in recovery that will help. The recovery community has a huge and rich tradition of giving back and staying connected with people. And I think that's the strength that we're building on with this recovery movement.